Good morning. My name is Larry Pointe-Jour, and can you believe it? We are coming up on an exam. In preparation for the exam, I wanted to just give you a quick lecture review. And what we're going to do is we're going to be going over some of the material in this section. And so, what I'd like you to do is to just take a few moments to review any assignment in this section, quiz, or reading in preparation for this exam. But without further ado, let's get into the review so we can be fully prepared. All right, so good morning. The first thing I'd like to go over, we're going to start in chapter 2. Let's take a look at some of the, chapter 2 is the introduction to the human body. There's a few things that we need to know here, so let's just take a look at some of the more important parts of it. Okay. So if you look at figure 2.12 in your book, one important thing that it would be covered is the directional terms that are applied to the body. We see here there is a figure, and you can see that towards the head, towards the top of the body, that would be considered the superior region of the head. So if we were in a room and we were just referencing the top portion of a figure, we would say the superior region, or the top of that body. And so there's a bunch of other anatomical terms there that we can also use to reference different parts of the body. We have posterior versus anterior. We have proximal versus distal. We have lateral versus medial. And all these things would be able to give us an insight as to where on the body we are talking about. Now, why do we have these things? We have these things because when you're making notes, you can give the reader, a really good idea of what part of the body you're talking about using anatomical terms. For example, if you're talking about the hand, you can say distal to the elbow. There was a contusion of some kind, and if you were talking about the back, you can say posterior. On the posterior region of the body, there was a gash or something like that. So let's get to know these terms very well. A lot of times they are opposite each other: superior versus inferior, posterior versus anterior, proximal versus distal. So this is something that we need to know very well. Also from chapter 2, we have planes. So planes are areas where the body is sort of, there's a line, a separation between two regions of the body. For example, there's a medial plane, a sagittal plane, a frontal plane, and a back plane. And let's look at the frontal plane. The frontal plane is a good one because it separates the anterior portion of the body, the front, with the posterior portion of the body, the back. Right? So this is another set of terms that we can use to talk about which region of the body we're referring to. And we can do that in text, or we can do that in speech. Okay, so some of our questions will be putting all these things together, and some of the questions are going to ask you where, on the dorsal side of the body, in the medial region, where do you see something happening? So you want to be able to know exactly what region of the body we're talking about when we use those terms in text or in speech. And so this chapter 2 should give you a good understanding of how to do that. The next thing I want to talk about are the cavities in the body. So we have different cavities where things are kept. You can imagine that the cranial cavity is where the brain is. What a lot of people don't realize in the beginning is that the cranial cavity actually stretches all the way down into the back, and it encapsulates the entire spinal column, the spinal cord. So going from the brain all the way down into the back, you have the cranial cavity. Then there is a thoracic cavity right in the middle of your chest, and different things are housed there. We also need to know about the abdominal cavity, and a lot of people forget about the pelvic cavity, but that's something we also need to know about as well. In time, we will go through what's inside of these cavities. You can imagine where the heart is, you can imagine where the lungs are. So just become very familiar with these cavities and what goes inside them. All right, so chapter 3. We're going to get into, if you read through chapter 3, you'll see that it's a great review on basic chemistry, and it gives you an idea of how chemistry relates to the body and organic things. But what I'm going to talk about right now are organic compounds. So organic compounds are found in living organisms. They consist mainly of hydrogen atoms covalently bonded to carbon atoms. There are a lot of them. We're going to be getting familiar with the popular ones as we go, but there are a lot to look over. But let's look at a few of. Okay, so there are 4 major types of organic compounds: carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. You might remember phospholipids make up a cell membrane, as an example. But let's talk about the 4 major groups. So carbohydrates provide energy for body processes, and they're stored in the body for later use. Lipids also provide energy. They provide cushioning and insulation, and they're able to be called on later as well for energy. Proteins are made from amino acids, and they function as enzymes, antibodies, plasma proteins, like in blood, structural proteins, and hormones. And last, we have nucleic acids, DNA and RNA, which are composed of nucleotides. DNA is very popular, and it's known as I consider it to be the code for building proteins. So it has a map or instructions on how proteins should be built, and the cell uses those instructions to create new proteins for the cell to use. RNA performs several functions in protein synthesis as well, and we'll get into that later. If you've heard of the COVID shot, you might have heard of the term mRNA passed around. Hopefully we'll talk about that later, but for right now we're just talking about DNA and RNA. Chapter 4. Okay, so chapter 4 is very important. It brings us back to the most fundamental unit of biology, which is the cell. I'm sure you've heard many of these topics, but we'll just go over them. So a cell is composed of a plasma membrane. You have the cytoplasm and the nucleus. So 3 components. The cytoplasm can be further subdivided, but you can think of it as that space inside of the cell where a lot of things happen. The plasma membrane is the outer border of the cell, and it's responsible for the passage of things in and out of the cell through the various transport mechanisms. If you remember simple diffusion for like, let's say, water, to get water in and out of the cell. Some of the organelles in the cell, let's list them off: the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi apparatus, the vesicles. They form the endomembrane system, and they produce and export cellular products. Other organelles, the mitochondria, which produces energy, lysosomes, perioxomes, function in energy production for the cell and cleaning things up as well. And then briefly mentioned was the cytoskeleton, which provides structural support, give the cell its shape, and also give the cell the ability to make small movements throughout their space. Once we get towards the nucleus, we see that it consists of two lipid bilayers to form like a nuclear membrane, similar to the cell's membrane but different. Inside of the nucleus, of course, there's the nucleoplasm, and the nucleus also houses the DNA, which can be tightly or loosely packed to provide the code, as we mentioned earlier, for protein synthesis. As we mentioned earlier, DNA stores the genetic code that's used to create proteins. The genetic code, or DNA, are the instructions for protein synthesis, and protein synthesis occurs in two, you can think of it as occurring in two steps: transcription and translation. Transcription is taking the genetic code or instructions from DNA and changing it into messenger RNA, mRNA, for protein synthesis. Translation involves the assembly of a protein using the code stored in messenger RNA to produce a protein. All right, so I just wanted to bring everything together with what we've looked at so far and see if we can identify a few things using some real images. So if you take a look at what we're showing now, you can see an image of the cranial cavity, and as you can imagine, the brain is located inside of the cranial cavity, and you can see the dark coloring that is directly underneath the bony mass or the skull. That would be what envelops the cranial cavity. Notice that it continues all the way down the spinal column, because the spinal cord is also part of the cranial cavity. In the next image, you can see that the thoracic cavity is being shown. If you look for these dark lines as well, outlining the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity, you can see a few structures here that you might be familiar with. From this image, see if you can spot the abdominal cavity, the pelvic cavity, and within those, either one of them, you should be able to find the spinal column, and see if you can also spot the liver.